Hello YouTube, welcome to today's video. In today's video we are gonna be watching the how to get diamond free tips to learn for every jungle, where we have Virkayu explaining. I will only watch the jungle part, so if you want to watch the entire video for top lane, mid lane, AD carry and support, I will link the video in the description. But yeah, I'll basically just watch the jungle part and let you guys know if I agree or disagree, and then yeah, let's jump into the video.
On that note, let's shift over to the jungle. Ganking and farming priority is obviously the most important aspect of jungling. I talk about this all over my main channel just to make sure that people are always thinking about, do I need to gank, do I need to farm, what's a good balance, and we are in a hybrid meta at the moment, so it's important to understand their relationship. If you want to AFK farm and not gank, well basically you're coin flipping your lanes. Your lanes are basically left to say, listen, if you guys win, you win, if you lose, you lose. Thing is, they have a jungler as well, so if that jungler goes for ganks, and yes, ganking is high variance, especially in a lot of low elos, but if there's a Leona, it's kind of difficult to mess that up, and if they show 3-4 times in the same lane, it's unlikely that your laners are going to respect that and not die at least a couple times. Then again, if you are that dude perma-ganking while the enemy farms and you don't get success from these ganks because you just play them like a lizard, well, they're going to steal all your camps, all your CSs, get objectives, and be 2-3 levels ahead of you. You need a happy balance. This will depend on your champion choice as well as your matchup. If you're a Warwick and Elise or Rexa, obviously there's more focus on you actually ganking early, but with those champions, make sure you assess which lane you want to gank and have a good first clear and second clear such that you don't fall behind early and you still have good control of your experience. For an Evelyn, for a Karthus, you definitely more focus on abusing these ganking windows to farm and counter jungle such that we can get 6 as soon as possible. And if you're facing some of those champions, use that window, go ahead. Just track where they are and don't give them free ganks through counter ganks because you don't actually understand what a map is. Then you have things like Diana who can do both very, very well. Healthy balance between her do easy first clear and trap control.
Diana's not the best example,
but come back, look for another gank, and then resequence again.
Hecarim was probably the best example before he got nerfed.
Sequences with ganking, and then of course, when your ult is up, use it. If you don't gank properly and you lose a lot of CS, you're gonna be behind. And if you're not a farming jungler, you can't just say, okay, now I'm gonna farm. Couple sequences, I'll be back in the game. If you're a slower farmer than the enemy jungler and you're behind, the only way you get back into it is with good ganks and, you know, making some desperate plays. And you never want to be in that scenario. So a couple tips just to think about. Look to take the outermost objective on the map before you reward yourself with your own camps. That means if there's a crab, a dragon, and the enemy jungler's away, you can secure those, fall back to your camps afterwards. Don't do your camps and then look for those things. Look for the outermost advantage.
To this, I would say if you can counter jungle, then that is more valuable than taking Scuttled Crab, Rifthilt, and Drake. So if you can counter jungle, you should counter jungle first, and then take neutral objectives as possible. And then fall back to your own jungle camps. So, but yeah, he's correct.
That you can get, use them to translate to nice ganks, and if that's not possible, now we can fall back to our camps. Also, make sure when you make good plays on one side of the map, you take the dragon and you want to go to the herald, finish your blue quadrant, go back to base, and now you know that you can go to the top side, forget about being counter jungle because there's nothing to counter.
Yeah, basically finish one side of your quadrant before going to the other side. So if you have 3 jungle camps on bot side, clear those 3 bot side camps before moving to top side. If you only have 2 bot side camps, finish those 2 before moving to the top. Don't finish 1 bot side camp and leave 1 or 2 up to go faster towards top, because that's just efficient when it comes to farming. And same thing for top side.
Jungle, and when you go back to the bottom side, you will have some fresh camps for you to snack on. At the end of the day, gank assessment in the early game when you're an early game jungler is the most important thing, because farming junglers, you can simply play around your ultimate and look for counter ganks through tracking. It is low variance and it is very good to climb at a low elo, but you do need to understand ganking etiquette, otherwise you will be doomed. Next up we have being...
Okay, so for tip number 1, I definitely agree on the fact that farming and pathing and figuring out good and bad ganks are really, really important to learn, and those are basically the basics of jungle. I will say that for lower elos, I typically recommend playing something that can gank rather than only power farming, due to the fact that many people make a ton of mistakes in low elo, and that includes the laners. And if you're playing a jungler that can gank, then you can more often punish the enemy laners for playing poorly and making mistakes, whereas if you're playing a power farming jungler, you're not really interacting with the map too much until you at least hit level 6, and you just focus on farming. So I'll say that it's probably better to play something that can gank rather than something that strictly power farms in lower elos.
Being a dynamic jungler means being proactive as well as reactive. This means you need to be able to adjust your game plan as the game goes on, depending on all the things that can happen, and trust me, they all can and will happen. For example, you might think, hey, top lane, that looks nice and juicy to gank, I'm gonna do that. Then he goes in ints. So now what? Well, it's pretty easy. You can take a crab gank mid lane and now focus on the bottom side, which might actually have a kill or look better in the current game state. Remember this one tip I always put in my videos. Do not play what should be, play what is. Even if your top laner should be creaming and destroying the enemy lane, it doesn't matter. If they're down, 3-4 kills, there's nothing you can do about it. Adapt and focus on the next win condition you can see. Might be you, but it also might be your bot lane or your mid lane. And the other most important thing is, of course, reactive pathing. This is my own term that I use on my channel again a lot because I'm a jungle YouTuber. I'm going to reference that. But when you see mid lane getting ganked, don't finish your wolves. Leave the wolf camp, rotate, make it a 2v2. They've wasted their spells on your mid laner. You can very often get good cleanup. The camps will be there afterwards, your mid laner might not be. You also need to understand equal and opposite plays. If the enemy jungler dives top lane and falls back to the herald, don't finish your quadrant and then decide to go to the dragon. Go to the dragon now, do some counter jungling, invade a buff, dive bot lane, look to make plays where the enemy jungler is not. Yeah, we need to be proactive in our game planning and thinking what we want to do, but you also need to reactively path in the case the enemy jungler and your laners do what you don't expect. And now obviously the strategic thing, think about the bigger picture.
Yeah, so for this tip regarding being proactive and reactive, I agree that in every game you'll be both proactive and reactive, and it's important that you know when to do what. I'll just add a few comments. So if you're having the better jungle matchup, you should play proactive, you should play more aggressive. You should look for plays regardless of what the enemy jungler is doing. Whereas if you're having the weaker jungle matchup, then play more reactive and wait for your opponent to make a play and then figure out how do I counter it. Is it by counter ganking it because I'm on the same side of the map? Is it by ganking bot lane because enemy jungler is ganking top lane, basically making a cross map play? Is it by taking the enemy jungle camps that if he's on top side I take his bot side camps and vice versa? But you should in all games be both proactive and reactive. So for example, if you have the knowledge of I know the enemy jungler is on bot side right now, that means that I can start Rift Herald even if I have the weaker matchup. Stuff like that is basically really, really important for junglers to know as well. So yeah, pretty good.
There's a long-term impact to your jungle decisions, and this is something in coaching I have to talk about a lot. We'll focus, 10, 20 minutes on just like the first 4 minutes of the game, because everything that happens afterwards is just a chain reaction. The dominoes falling of your own stupidity or your own genius. Think about what's actually going to happen throughout the course of the game. Think a couple moves ahead. If I do this, what's the enemy jungler going to do if he knows I'm doing it? For example, if you play around a certain lane and get them ahead, what does that actually mean for the outcome of your game? What if they just take that lead and keep pushing and dying multiple times? What were you doing with that lead and that pressure that they had? Even if they threw the lead you gave them, it's important for you also to play your own game and foresee what might happen and understand. If they rotate with you to other towers to take those, cool. If they don't, what can you do that still pushes the game forward in a good direction? It can also be more simple. If you're camping, a Scion who's Hellbreak and doesn't care if they die because they just take the turrets with them, you could just be wasting your time. Why not try some ganks in the mid lane or the bottom lane? Likewise, ganking in Malphite. You might have a carry top laner, but if you kill Malphite 14 times, he just has to press the magic button in a 5v5 and they can win. Whereas even if Malphite beats your laner and gets fed, if you've got a really well fed and good positioning ADC with some nice peel, they can deal with that Malphite in a very easy way. Things like if at bot lane equals more dragons, if at top lane equals more heralds. Where do you want to get your advantages from? Which champions do you want to play around? And which is the best way for you to close and win the game? If you gank bot lane here and then take a dragon and the enemy jungler makes a mistake, well, now you can take herald as well and think about winning the whole map, which is always the dream. If that sounds complicated, that's because it is. Jungling is. It is a chess match, and you have to track the enemy jungler and account for what they're doing as well.
Jungle requires the most knowledge out of any role in the game. So yeah, thinking about the bigger picture is pretty important. Basically figuring out what will happen in the next 5 minutes, what's happened in the next 10 minutes, how do I win the game later on. So I'll give some examples. So if you have something that's really strong in the early game, but ends up losing, then there's no point in playing for that lane, because if they're already behind and they're good in the early game, then by the time you get them back into the game, you're mid-game and they already start falling off, so there's no point in playing for them anymore. So basically play for your winning lanes and get them further ahead, because it's more important to get someone further ahead rather than making people get back into the game. So play for the ones that are already winning rather than playing for the ones that are losing. It's pretty important. And then figure out if the ganks that you're doing will actually end up mattering. if you end up killing a Malphite 2 times in the early game, does that actually matter later on in the game? Most likely not, because Malphite is just a tank who will press R, and he doesn't really carry in terms of doing damage. He carries in the sense that he will engage onto as many people as possible and frontline, whereas if the rest of his team will then do the damage. So figuring out like if the ganks that you're going to do actually has any relevancy in the late game and in the team fights, especially later on into the game. So yeah, pretty good video. I agree with all the tips. I wanted to add a few more comments because I feel like having a segment that is like 5 minutes long is not enough, and I just wanted to share some details and give some examples for jungle, but I felt like they were pretty good tips. Virkayu is also a jungle player, so it makes sense that he gives really, really good tips. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, and if you have any feedback or just want to help my channel grow, leave a comment in the comment section for the algorithm to recommend my channel. I would appreciate that a lot. And otherwise, subscribe to my YouTube channel to not miss out on future videos. And then I hope to see you guys either on my next live stream on Twitch or in my next YouTube video. So thank you for watching and see you guys.